Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the program. Cameroon has successfully organized the 14th edition of the World Trade Organization's Ministers' Conference, the second of its kind in Africa. About 4,000 delegates from 166 countries across the world were a big event with participants defending own interests, expected to bridge the widening trade and development gaps. The tireless endeavors to bring everyone to the table is to arrive at the common good for the greatest majority in the concert of nations. This explains why a wide range of themes were on the discussion table. On Press Hour today, our focus shall be to see what opportunities this World Rendezvous opens to humanity. So our debate topic is as follows. Is the WTO Ministers' Conference a new window of hope? I am Kilian Ndandifon in Yaoundé, and this is Press Hour. Once again, we welcome you to today's edition of Press Hour. And our topic again is WTO MC14 Ministers Conference, the 14th edition, a window of hope. And to talk about this, we have brought to this set Professor Emeritus Jane Kelsey, who is a University of Auckland in New Zealand. She is a delegate. You're welcome to this program. We have another person that is Hijit Das, who is an independent trade researcher. You're from India, am I right?
Thank you, yes.
You're welcome to Press Hour. And we have two other participants you are used to. We want to present to you Dr. Tumenta Kennedy, who is an economist. He is the CEO of Africa BIPS. That's an economic activity. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Kilen.
Yes, and Blaise Bebe Abong is a development cooperation specialist. Welcome to Press Hour.
Thank you very much, Kilian.
Yes, this program starts with the press. Is all about the press, and we're going to revisit what the press has been feeding on in the week that just passed. And Clovis Bawe read the newspapers for Press Hour. Clovis?
On a strongly political note, with widespread coverage of the 41st anniversary of the Cameroon People's Democratic Movement, according to Cameroon Tribune, the milestone signals what it describes as a renewed season of opportunities for women and youths across the country. The Guardian Post, on its part, reports that in Santa, party supporters used the celebrations to begin laying the groundwork for what they hope will be a landslide victory in the upcoming twin elections. Meanwhile, the Post strikes a more critical tone, arguing that even at 41, the CPDM remains, in its words, the Cameroon National Union in disguise, raising questions about political continuity and reform. From politics, the papers shift focus to economic engagement, particularly the growing call for Cameroonians in the diaspora to invest back home. Both the Guardian Post and the Herald Tribune highlight statements by Professor Victor Mbarika, president of the Board of Trustees of the ICT University, who praised government's effort in supporting diaspora-driven initiatives. The papers further report that he commended the swift intervention of state authorities in resolving recent misunderstanding between his institution and the University of Buea. Away from economic prospects, the spotlight also turned to Cameroon's presence on the global stage as the country hosted the 14th Ministerial Conference of the World Trade Organization. The Median and Cameroon Tribune reports that the Prime Minister Head of Government, Chief Dr. Joseph John Gute, representing the Head of State, officially opened deliberations at the Yaoundé Conference Center on Thursday, setting the tone for discussions on global trade reforms. The Guardian Post adds that, in his address, the Prime Minister reaffirmed Cameroon's commitment to promoting fair and inclusive global trade. And finally, on the religious front, preparations for the visit of Pope Leo XIV continued to gather momentum. Cameroon Tribune reports that the president of the National Episcopal Conference, Archbishop Andrew Nkea, led a delegation of Catholic prelates to the Star Building to discuss logistical arrangements ahead of the visit. Meanwhile, The Herald Tribune and Municipal Update indicates that the Archbishop of Bamenda unveiled the theme for the papal visit while cautioning against attaching any political expectation to the event. Viewers, that's how the press captured the week. I will be back again next week, God willing. For now, Press R continues.
Thank you so much, Clovis. We look forward to having you with another edition of that slot in this our very widely watched program, the favorite program on CRTV, Press R. Now we're going to go straight into our discussion. Is the WTO Ministers' Conference, the 14th edition in Yaoundé, a window of hope? I'm going to ask the participants who are here, who have been part at a distance or close to this conference, what themes caught their attention, particularly during the conference that ends this Sunday, beginning with Emeritus Professor Jane Kelsey. Let us know what is the theme, or one or two, that actually caught your attention or that you were coming to address.
Thank you very much, and I'm very pleased to be here. I've been to a lot of ministerial meetings starting back in 1990, and this is not an orthodox ministerial meeting. Usually it would discuss issues, agriculture, fisheries, services, specific economic issues. But the focus for this ministerial has been around what is described as the reform agenda for the WTO. And so that is what in particular has struck me in this conference. Both the content and the process have been quite unorthodox, not from the Cameroonian hosts, from the organization by the WTO and its leadership. And so the key themes, certainly that have occupied the whole of the second day, and then my own engagement, have been about the attempts to remake the rule book of the WTO, to move it from a multilateral process in which all members are actively involved and all of their interests and issues are dealt with in a way that allows trade-offs and allows developing countries especially to have their issues on the table, to more subgroups, we call them plurilateral groups of members, largely the more powerful states, saying these are the issues that they want to address. So that has been probably the key issue, that reform agenda and what its implications for developing countries, not just in Africa, but Pacific Asia, have been.
I have a question at this level. There's that gap between the developing countries and the developed countries. In a classroom situation, let me take this analogy. If you were a teacher, will you pull the intelligent student towards the dull student or the dull student towards the intelligent student? So I transpose it to what we're talking about. Should the developing countries work harder to meet the level of the developed, the more civilized countries, or it should be the other way around?
I'm not sure that the classroom analogy works for me there, because in theory in the WTO, all member states are equal, right? And they should all respect the objectives and needs of each other. Now, we know we live in a real world where power politics dominates and where there is an inequality that is intrinsic between some players and other players in the WTO. And so I was, a couple of months ago, I was at a meeting in Uganda with African delegations and civil society and so on, and they were saying our issues are things like industrialization and being able to do added value for our resources rather than having them shipped offshore. Technology transfer that enables us to do those, ways that we can develop digitally amongst ourselves. That's not the rule book that the more powerful players are trying to pursue there. So it's not really a question of whether developing countries, African countries, should be trying to adapt to the rule book of the rule makers who've been doing that since colonial times, but how you level up that playing field in ways that develop rules that allow you to meet your aspirations. And the Africa Group's statement to the WTO ministerial set out very clearly what would help achieve that. Sadly, that is not what is on the agenda for this ministerial.
Thank you so much for that sincere answer. I think you're saying the gap should be closed, taking into consideration so many things. Now, I'm going to ask you the same question, Blaise. What theme caught you? Professor Jane has talked about this is reform, that's remaking the rules so that it favors those who are left behind. Now, what theme? You could elaborate on this. You could also react to what she said.
Yes, Killian. I think that now that you talk about a theme, I could mention some of the topics that are important that have, been debated all through the week. But when I want to look at a theme, what strikes me most, it's this underlying feeling, this underlying mindset that has, been there all through this conference, this ministerial, and it's really about the struggles that less developed countries, must engage in order to have their voices heard on some of the critical issues that are facing the WTO, and not only the WTO, but that are facing international development as a whole. And I've had cause to say that this ministerial is historic, not historic about the outcomes, but historic about the time at which it is holding. 30 years after 1995, with the creation of WTO, this conference is holding at a time when the organization is facing all of the most critical problems that are imaginable. And historic because we may remember that in Yaoundé, the global trading community failed to take the bulls by the horns in order to solve some of the dire problems of inequality that continue facing less developed countries, 33 of which are in Africa. We may also remember that at this point in time, owing to the growth of unilateral decision taking, owing to the growth of mercantilism, the growth of protectionism, of people only thinking about their interest, we may have not really grabbed the opportunity to make an impactful change in the way the organization carries itself. And when I listen to the opening speeches, I'll be keen to listen to the closing speeches to see how WTO officials, measure the amount of impact that they have garnered from Yaoundé. So, of course, a critical topic to me in this light, in the light of what I have said, is about the investment facilitation, the facilitation for investment, the facilitation of investment for development agreement, which continues to stall. The IFD continues to stall because we can't find the kind of consensus that is necessary to push it forward. Of course, LDCs want this to happen, but it must happen in a way that creates consensus around the ideals for transparency in investment, information sharing, opening up opportunities that can help African countries to domesticate value chains, that production can happen at home up to certain levels so that we are not exporting jobs and wealth.
Yes, so many people join you to condemn or to say protectionism that you mentioned, which is gaining ground around the world now. it's not what should take place. But when you look at those who are coming back to this policy of protectionism, it's like getting their identity first, who they are, what they have, before they take to the marketplace, the concept of nations. So, if you were the one, as a country or as a region, with so much, will you take it to the market square and share with someone who has virtually nothing? Or you will choose, okay, I will give a part that can help that person, or maybe technology that will help that person to come up. So I don't lose. It's a win-win.
Yeah, you see, what we see is that in the recent 12 months, because most of that has happened in the past 12 months, the disruptions to global trade are not only engineered by forward-looking policies, they are more so engineered by trade wars of countries using maybe tariffs to attain other objectives that are not related to trade. So that kind of protectionism must be called out. It is dangerous. Dangerous because we live in an integrated system. So all of these actions have ripple effects in other parts of the world. For instance, I take an example. We are facing a war in the Gulf. That war has shown us how interconnected we remain, despite all the measures that countries can take to safeguard their economies at home, to protect primary industries, to be able to give, a certain feeling that they have to help themselves before they help others. No, we are a global community. What happens in Japan immediately has effects on some small trader in Nigeria, in Cameroon, in South Africa. So we must be conscious that you can't protect yourself by destroying others.
Yes. Now let me take it to an economist, Mr. Abhijit. I will come to you. Dr. Tumenta Kennedy is an economist, renowned economist we know. In Cameroon, for example, and in many countries, developing countries, we are talking about import substitution policy that we're pushing across, because we want not only to be consumers in the world market space, we also have to provide what we have. And in most of these developing countries, we are consumer economies. How do you expect, you as an economist, someone who has, and you do not have to come and say, okay, we're going to share in terms of import substitution and what they're talking about?
Yeah, thank you very much, Kilem. I think that the greatest debate currently is how do we assist, most especially from the African bloc, how do we assist Africa's economy to prepare for global shocks? Remember that after the COVID-19 pandemic and some of the supply chain disruptions, most Africans' economy discovered that they could not even feed their populations. The agricultural subsidies that are being given in Europe destroyed our agricultural sectors here. Secondly, with the Russian-Ukrainian war, we discovered that 70 to 80% of our fertilizers came from that area. And the shock, the economic shock and the livelihood shock was so much. And the African Union itself had asked most of the countries in preparation for the African Continental Free Trade to go in for at least import substitution. And for us to carry out these import substitutions, we need to carry out a paradigm shift. And that's why I want to raise a fundamental shift that we need. The WTO, following David Ricardo's, we base on from absolute advantage to comparative advantage. And from there, we expected competitive advantage to come out. But what we have seen during the whole debate is that there is another advantage that will help humanity, which is a collective advantage. It is in the enlightened self-interest of the Europeans, the Americans, and the developed nations to empower farmers, to empower the least developed nations, to create local industries, local subsystem industries, to at least carry out the minimum transformations of their raw materials. It is in their enlightened self-interest. The pressure, the global pressure we have is based on the so-called absolute advantage, competitive advantage, which are sometimes not real competitive advantage because the rules of the game are skewed, manipulated, either through political interest or by bullying. We say global bullying, and sometimes politicians are not free to create the fair rules of the game. So that is why some of us, Africans economics, are saying we have the resources, we have the rare minerals, we have the Africans well-trained in many universities, in New Zealand, in India, in Europe and America. We have diasporas that have been trained. And today, we need to move from comparative advantage into collective advantage. What is it that we can benefit as humanity to create opportunity? And that is why the import substitution for us is a key. And that is why we are saying that our defense industries were destroyed post-colonial period. And sometimes the Bretton Woods institution did not even help us with structural adjustment program. So if we look at the baskets of all of these issues, we need to look at collective advantage, which is not a zero-sum game, saying, of course, we need to, in what degree can we allow, let's say, producers in the UK or in New Zealand to relocate its production facilities in Cameroon, for example, where we have the natural resources, and make use of the African continental free trade that has a bigger market. So you supply from New Zealand to other countries closer to you, but you locate just the machines into a creating production site in the sub-region.
Thank you so much. Mr. Abhijit Das, I'm not going to get you right away at the conference center, Yaoundé Conference Center, where the WTO Ministers' Conference is taking place. I met you there and interviewed you and a host of others. You watch your reaction and the reactions of others and develop your point. Because if I allow you to talk now, you will come repeat. So we're going to get the reactions of some of these delegates who are attending the World Trade Organization's Ministers' Conference here in Yaoundé.
An attempt is sought to be made whereby a rules-based system will be deformed into a power-based organization, and this is sought to be achieved by getting rid of some of the foundational principles of the WTO, such as decision-making by consensus, or the non-discriminatory treatment principle enshrined in the most favored nation treatment, as well as diluting or even getting rid of special and differential treatment provisions for developing countries.
The resolutions of WTO restrict the capacity of individual countries to develop their own national policies. So I think at this moment the discussion of a reform of WTO is being an important issue of this conference. We can retry to discuss the principles of WTO and especially the space for national autonomous development policies.
It's a major issue for my country. I come from India, and it's also a major issue for most of the African countries. For us, we would want that our small farmers should be able to continue to produce. They should be able to, meet their livelihood needs, and that they should be able to meet the food security of their own countries. But what we see here in the WTO negotiations is that there are many challenges from the WTO rules that are posed to our farmers in such a way that they're finding it difficult to actually continue to produce. So I will tell you one key issue in the WTO is, of course, addressing domestic subsidies. Now our farmers, your farmers, our farmers everywhere in developing countries and LDCs, they need government subsidies.
Yes, non-discriminatory rules will get rid of preferential special treatment and others. That is your stand. Can you develop this for us?
Thank you, Killian. Firstly, let me mention that I'm delighted to be here in such a lovely city called Yaoundé. I have loved seeing some of the sights here, and that will be a lifelong memory for me. Coming specifically to the ministerial conference, what I do find a bit problematic in this ministerial conference, and for me this is the 8th ministerial conference which I am either directly participating or observing from the sidelines, is that one of the most important issues for a large number of the WTO membership, that is the developing countries, the least developed countries, is agriculture. Each of the previous ministerial conferences from 2001 onwards had very intense debates, discussions, negotiations on agriculture. And that was the right thing to do, because that is what impacts livelihoods of hundreds of millions of our people. That is what helps in some manner sustain agriculture. Unfortunately, at this ministerial conference, we did not see any of those big debates on agriculture. So for me, that is a bit of a disappointment. I will elaborate on agriculture a bit later, but coming to the two specific points about non-discrimination and special and differential treatment. Under the rules of the WTO, when countries trade with each other, the best treatment which they give to any trading partner in the world, be it a WTO member or it could be to any country which is not a WTO member, that best treatment, what is called the most favored nation treatment, has to be extended unconditionally and immediately to the entire WTO membership. What does this do? What are the benefits? First and foremost, transparency. We get around the problem of multiple procedures for different countries, but most importantly, we prevent exploitative behavior by the rich and powerful. Even the rich and powerful have to extend the same non-discriminatory, most favored nation treatment to the entire membership. Now, under the garb of WTO reform, and I do realize that Professor Kelsey will be talking more about it, an attempt is being made to make changes to this fundamental principle of the WTO. Now, I'm not saying that those changes will be made today, but a roadmap is sought to be laid down whereby such changes could be made, especially on account of the position of United States, European Union, United Kingdom, etc. Of course, the developing countries are likely to be resisting such a change, because making such a change to the foundational principle of the WTO will have far-reaching adverse implications for them. On the second issue of special and differential treatment, I go back to some of the initial discussions we had in our program today. WTO recognizes that countries are at a different stages of development, yes, different levels of development, and hence, after the GATT was established in 1948, by 1965-66, the rule book of GATT was changed. GATT initially was based on the principle of reciprocity. You give me something, I will give you something in commensurate amount, similar concessions. Developing countries had very little to offer, and hence they were getting very little from the other side.
But at that time, the problem is those who brought that up had this idea of a kind of socialism. But in a more democratic world that we have today, it is different. People have to develop at different levels according to their ability. Are you pulling us back to 1948?
Absolutely. So Very correct point, Killian. So in 1965-66, the principle of non-reciprocity was brought into the GATT rule book. What did it say? What it said was that in tariff negotiations, the developed world will not expect commensurate concessions from the developing world. In other words, developed world will give X amount of concession, developing countries were expected to give less than X amount of concession. And an important point to mention here is that one of the foundational reasons why this less than full reciprocity, which is also called the mother provision for special and differential treatment, a foundational reason was that the GATT contracting parties noted the difference in standards of living between developed and developing countries. Now, the interesting thing is, if you look at how the gaps in standards of living has progressed, I did a very interesting exercise. I compared the gaps in standards of living between 110 developing countries for which I had the data and compared it with the gap with US in 1995 and the gap today. You'll be surprised. That gap has increased. No doubt developing countries have progressed, but they've slipped behind the developed world.
Now, you are from India, and in terms of technology, even used in the US you're talking about, I know the position that the Indians, people who come from India, hold there when we are talking about technology, probably maybe in Europe. Those are your country people. Why don't they take that back and catapult and propel the development of your country?
Excellent question, Killian. The reason why talent moves out from most of our countries into the developed world is the ecosystem. And not only the ecosystem, the rules of the game. As Professor Kennedy said, the rules of the game at the WTO are rigged. And they are rigged in favor of the developed world. Why is it that developing countries are not able to get into import substitution? Why is it that African countries, which are rich in natural resources, which are rich in critical minerals, end up just exporting the primary commodity? Why is it that they cannot impose import restriction, enhance domestic availability of natural resources, thereby creating a vibrant downstream value-added processing industry? Answer lies in the rules of the GATT and WTO.
It starts with advocacy, that's what you're saying. And this is a platform. You're saying it is part of the discussion. And what I know is many of you have the same idea. You are talking about this because you came for the conference. So those who, according to you, is your word, rig the rules, are listening, and this is how it comes up, and we have a change. Now we're going to listen to also watch one of the participants who hold your idea. He's from Norway. That is Mr. Thoralf Stenvold, who feel that if there are problems, they are linked to justice, social justice, security, and peace.
All the 17 goals of sustainable development are crucially important for trade and vice versa. Trade rules must take into account its repercussions, how it impacts the sustainable development goals. And more specifically, you notice my tie? This is from the United Nations Security Council chamber. It was a gift from Norway in 1952. We got it back when they rebuilt or refurbished. We made certain things, including this tie. So this is a symbol of peace and justice. This is a symbol of sustainable development. Without this, you will not have this. That's my message. If you want peace, you have to cultivate social justice. First of all, I congratulate Cameroon being the host of this incredibly important conference. You are perfectly placed to spread the word to your continent that you need to pursue justice in order to achieve peace and security. Back to my point. I think Africa is a pivotal moment of your continent's contribution to global governance. Take this opportunity and bring the message forward.
Thank you so much. That's another message. We're going to move forward with this. He has said social justice. I think it aligns with what you were talking about. But he is of a different kind of democracy because he is the CEO, he's the founder and managing director of Progressive Diplomacy. You are a diplomat. What does he mean by the progressive
Well, I think that
diplomacy?
What they refer today to progressive diplomacy is diplomacy that takes into consideration the changing nature of the world. It's diplomacy that is not, fixed in the past, in the Westphalian world, to use that technical term, in a term where it was all interest, and interest. No, today, interests are many and wide-ranging. Sometimes our interests are met in you meeting your own interest. I take an example. Dr. Kennedy talked about the pressures that African countries are facing because of, the dire resources, the meager resources made available at home to help us grow, to help us produce. But the aftermath of that is that migration. It's a migration crisis. Now, if Europe has to deal with a migration crisis, then they must be able to look at what is the cause, what is the fundamental cause of this migration crisis. The migration crisis stems from the huge inequalities that we have to deal with on a daily basis. So I think, and now you know that today a lot of people are pushing these concepts to a whole new level. But the bottom line is that we need to have strategy. Diplomacy is an effort of strategy. I like to say that, yes, we have identified the problem. We may have identified the problem. But what do we do to provide solutions for ourselves? I'll give you an example. In the regime of special and differential treatment of the WTO, which allows for less developed countries to have lower levels of concessions when in trade with with rich countries, with developed countries. Take the EPAs, the Economic Partnership Agreements. The Economic Partnership Agreement with Europe was proposed by Europe to Africa. AGOA was proposed by the United States to Africa.
And
now,
it worked well.
China, no, I'm coming. China is proposing an economic partnership to Africa. Being on a special and differential treatment doesn't mean that you always have to receive. It doesn't mean that you only have to stay at the receiving end, waiting for whatever tariff concessions and preferential trade agreements that the rich country proposes to you. I speak to this because I think that we need to counteract, we need to contribute to solutions to our problems by affording to be strategic.
Okay. Thank you so much.
We need to.
You mentioned agriculture, that you expected agriculture to take central stage. You said that before. And you promised we were going to talk about agriculture. Now let's talk about agriculture. You also said, mentioned cotton, that you used the example of cotton as a good that we have in abundance in Africa. Can we know about that before I come to Professor Emeritus Jane Kelsey? Would you like to start? No. Abhijit?
Okay. I'll speak a bit on agriculture. When the last ministerial conference of the WTO was held in the African continent, that was at Nairobi in 2015. And at that ministerial conference, 3 important decisions were taken to continue with full sincerity negotiations for achieving outcomes on the following. One is reduction in subsidies to cotton, primarily those given by the developed world, but by other countries as well. Second was addressing the problem of import surges and dips in prices of imported consignments of agriculture products through something called the Special Safeguard Mechanism, which in WTO jargon is called SSM. And third was to address and secure a permanent solution to the problem of public stockholding for food security purposes. These decisions were taken more than a decade ago. There has been almost no progress in any of these tracks. in any of these three areas. In fact, on the issue of public stock holding, in 2022, almost 80 countries, including the African group, and what is called...
There's a transformation going on of agricultural goods in some African countries already.
Yes.
Are you saying that's not a change?
No, that's a very big change.
Yes.
But the rules have to change. Rules of the game have to change as the WTO. If the rules of the game do not change, then the asymmetries which are contained in the Agreement on Agriculture, the imbalances which are contained in the Agreement on Agriculture, those would continue to hit us in the developing countries. So the attempt in respect of these three areas was to have rules that would be less unfair to us. Unfortunately, not much progress has been made in those three areas. Let's just confine my attention to cotton. Cotton is a product of keen interest to Cameroon. Cotton is also a product of tremendous importance to Benin, Mali, Burkina Faso, Chad, and many other countries. And the problem of cotton producers was identified in 2003 as being the huge subsidies granted by United States to its cotton farmers. It depressed global prices, it displaced exports of African countries from global markets. So there was a commitment in 2004, reiterated in 2005 ministerial conference, that the US cotton subsidies, or the cotton subsidies in general, will be cut expeditiously, specifically, ambitiously.
Wow, that is well explained. And one of the key speakers during the conference of ministers of the World Trade Organization at the conference center in Yaoundé was the president of Afreximbank, Mr. Ilombi George, and he talked about the value of cotton if we did that. We're going to listen to him. He actually explains further what you're talking about.
All the 17 goals of sustainable development are crucially important for trade and vice versa. Trade rules must take into account its repercussions, how it impacts the sustainable development goals. And more specifically, you notice my tie? This is from the United Nations Security Council chamber. It was a gift from Norway in 1952. We got it back.
Well, that's not the feed that we are talking about. We're talking about Mr. Elombi George, who was a keynote speaker. He paid a visit to the Minister of Territorial Administration, Paula Tanganji, and yes, there he explained to CRTV the importance of revaluing cotton that we're talking about. Yes, we're going to have that right now.
If you went to have your birth certificate certified in a district office or in the council office, and that can be done in 1 hour, why should you wait for 6 hours? So that's time lost. That's at a personal level. Then transpose that into business. If you're trying to build an industrial zone, which is what we do, and some equipment is coming from abroad, and that equipment waits in the port for 6 weeks when it should have been cleared in a week. This loss of time is loss of money, is loss of wealth. The loss of wealth means many people are not at work, and when many people are not at work, it means they're not paying taxes, and the tax base is reduced for the state. I cited the case of Benin only because we were discussing for the WTO meetings in Yaoundé. Cotton was an important aspect, and that was the subject of the discussions. Had they discussed wood, I would have mentioned Gabon. Had they discussed manganese, I would have discussed our experience in Gabon and elsewhere. But take cotton, which is Benin. 1 kilogram it used to sell, 40,000 tons times $1 or so, $1.5 or even $2 at the end of the year is $40 million. If you take 1 kilogram, the same kilogram, and you start to process, 1 kilogram gives you 4 t-shirts, One T-shirt is about $4, $5. So the thing is gone up suddenly by 4 times minimum. And so the Beninese 40 million has become 800 million. And that for us is real, is what we actually did. So we have the figures. And that's for only 10% of the Beninese cotton processed. So if you take that to 20%, $800 million becomes 1.6 billion. And if you take it up to 40%, so if you process only 50% of the cotton in Benin, something extraordinary happens in the country. Ministers in government, in finance, in economy, in Prime Minister's office, the key question in their minds is, what can we do here? What can we do to change this sector? Do you need some help from us? That's precisely what I was discussing with him. And so that we know that when those projects come to cabinet and he's present, he supports them. As a bank, he asks me, what's your balance sheet now? And I give him the figure. He says, is that enough money if we wanted to do XYZ, iron processing in Cameroon? And I tell him, yes, it is.
Wow, this explains, it breaks down what you were talking about. Now I'm going to Professor Jane Kesley. You come from New Zealand, and what the president of Afrexim Bank is saying, what Mr. Abhijit Das have been saying, what Dr. Kennedy and probably my brother Abong have been saying, we come from developing countries, we come from the developing world. You come from a more developed world, New Zealand. Do you have this problem of subsidies, of transformation, of processing that we are talking about here in agriculture? You don't have that.
It may surprise you for me to say, yes, we do. And my own government has been very vocal in seeking reform of the agricultural rules in the WTO, because when those rules were being negotiated during the Uruguay round of negotiations, the dominant decisions on agriculture were made in a side room by the US and the EU, something known as the Blair House Accord. And they designed it so they could keep subsidizing their farmers. And I was actually in 1990 in a meeting in Brussels of the GATT negotiations, and there were all of these farmers from Europe who were objecting to these new rules because they were unfair to their small farmers as well. And so those are still the rules today. And I think one of the important things for us to remember is when countries talk about the rules-based system, those rules are not neutral. They were constructed in a particular context. And in my own country, we are very much locked into the model that Dr. Kennedy was talking about of competitive advantage and comparative advantage. And we are a farming country, but most of our exports are actually low value added dairy products or unprocessed logs and timber.
Even from your country?
Even from my country. And part of the difficulty we have is not only are these rules not going to be changed in the WTO because the US and the EU have no intention of giving a consensus to change those rules, but other contexts which were being discussed, the energy crisis, we rely on maritime and air transportation and a lot of energy. We require supply chains that are functional, that are not functional now. There's an assumption that tariffs have a level of predictability to them. We have the climate crisis, which is upturning the whole of the agriculture, fisheries, horticulture sectors. And these are common problems to many, many countries. But because we are trapped in our country in this comparative advantage paradigm, and that's what the WTO rules have encouraged us to do, it's very difficult to say reform of the WTO should be addressing those questions, the questions on cotton, the questions of value added for African producers and for our people. It's very hard to get trade officials and ministers and businesses that are involved in the current model to think outside the box as to what a different system or paradigm might look like.
Thank you. We don't have so much time left to go to the end of this program. There is a question on ask. I'm going to ask you a different question. What does Cameroon, after having brought about 4,000 delegates to Cameroon from 166 countries, what does Cameroon, diplomatically speaking, gain from this?
Of course, it's a very huge thing, because that's why there are always multiple countries, wanting to host such international meetings. And I think that the WTO ministerial conference only compares to the COP, the UN conference on climate and environment that also happens with this periodicity. So to have 4,000 delegates coming into your country is a huge boost for the tourism sector, because people come here and they say they want to come again. You have the hospitality sector, hotels. Yaoundé was completely shut down. You couldn't get a single room on your own if you were not, vetted on a government-approved list for the delegations. So that has brought in a lot of income. Now, but I want to decry that we need to use these opportunities to see that we don't need to have a visa that costs 100,000 francs, almost $150 euros.
We'll look at that.
Yeah,
we'll
so
look
I
at that when we come to some other
think
things.
that this has been a progressive move. Yaoundé has benefited. I hope that we can, gain the momentum to be able to push forward the African agenda to ensure that less developed countries can also make the most out of these gatherings.
Yes, Dr. Kennedy, there is this blue economy aspect that came up. How do we gain as Cameroon and some other economic aspects of life from this World Trade Organization Ministers Conference?
Yeah.
You have 2 minutes, please.
Yes, I think that the minimum benefit is that there was a minimum agreement on the blue economy from the sustainability part of it. I think countries has been asked not to give subsidies to their fishing vessels, fishing in the overfished areas, and also making sure that some of these advantages could get back to our local fishermen. So what I'm saying is the minimum agreement, I call it minimum agreement is because you're asking nations not to give direct subsidies. And at the same time, when you ask, so what are the compensation you could give to the least developed nations to be able to develop their fishing industry, you find a very minimal amount that was put. I think the funds that was put has approximately $20 million, 20 million, and only nations that actually signed this agreement are allowed to benefit from capacity building, helping them to implement this strategy, but not actually helping our fishermen to get vessels.
You're right. I also spoke to Ranja Sengupta, who is a senior researcher from India. She hammered on these subsidies that WTO is supposed to open up so that there should be public subsidies to especially farmers. Now, there is someone we also spoke with, Professor Chizo Ndukwe Okafo, who is CEO of our organization, Nigeria. She talked about some of the instruments and gaps, that's regulation, what could help us have what you wish for. Now, let's watch her. Let's listen to her.
When it comes to instruments and gaps, every country is fighting for their own rights. But for me, WTO is a great organization, when it comes, for example, to Africa, what the instruments we need to know is collaboration, regional collaboration first, using some of the existing platforms like ECOWAS and AU, African Union, and AFTA, to develop a strong regional partnership with logistics that is transparent and de-risked. Any framework they put together needs to involve product safety across board, especially with the e-commerce monetarium. There has to be a political will. So it's not just WTO, the politicians as well as the business people. You can't do one without the other. It has to be a triage of the businesses, a triage of the politicians, as well as WTO. So WTO will help them build a framework and set up a regional framework. And then the businesses come in, but you have to, a businessman is not going to invest if he's going to lose his money. So there are so many fragmented regulations. So what WTO can come is to remove that fragmentation of regulations. So when you're moving from one country to the other, like they have in Europe, in the EU, the regulations of one country does not hinder business for the other. So there has to be a removal of the fragmentations of regulations.
Thank you so much. We don't have much time left. We're going to answer this question as we prepare to leave this set. What new hope do we see, despite all the things that you've said, in this current WTO Ministers' Conference in Yaoundé?
Well, Killian, they say that every dark cloud has its silver lining. What I see as hope is that despite all of the challenges, member countries can still come together to look at each other and to talk about the issues. So moving forward, Africa must understand that this is a time for strategy, for long-term policy, and for putting in place mechanisms that can help us to fight for ourselves.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kennedy.
Yes, the WTO provides rules, but African nations must provide the results. So what matters is not whether MC14 was a hope, but it's for these windows to be open for our tech startups, for our agricultural production hubs, to make sure that we can use the opportunities that were signed at the Green Room.
Abhijit Das?
WTO rules must have development at their heart, and hopefully the process of WTO reform should take us in that direction, and the WTO membership must walk the talk of development-oriented WTO reform.
Thank you so much, Professor Emeritus Jane Kelsey.
I think hope comes from people having vision and people having commitment and people having strategy. And the hopeful thing for me out of this week's meeting is that the power brokers who wanted to impose their agenda have had collective voices of developing countries, of civil society, of business, saying that is not the future that they are looking for. So we need to build on that.
Thank you so much. You watch us from your homes. Professor Emeritus Jane Kelsey, University of Auckland in New Zealand. We had Abhijit Das, independent trade researcher from India. Dr. Tumenta Kennedy is an economist, CEO of African BIPS, and Blaise Bebe Abong, development cooperation specialist. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I also want to thank you for watching this program.